Yo, yo, what's happening, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Grow CFO podcast, where we dive deep into conversations about scaling a D2C brand with a profit focused mindset. I'm your host, Jon Blair, founder of Grow CFO. We're the go to outsource finance and accounting firm for 8 and 9 figure D2C brands. And today I'm here with my buddy Clay Banks. He's had his hands in so many things. I wasn't exactly sure how to introduce him, but as of today, he is the founder of Glory Light, a growing e-commerce brand, and he also runs a coaching business called In-Pace Line, kind of a strategic growth firm that helps accelerate visionary brands. He's got a much more extensive background than just that, which I'll let him tell in a second. But Clay, thanks for joining, man. How are things going in your world today?
Glad to be here, John. And today's Cyber Monday, so things are going good for us today. Our plan is working as designed. I'm able to take time away from those busy hours of e-commerce hype season and come be with you. So I'm glad to be spending our time today together.
Yeah, man, we call this at Free to Grow, we call this the e-commerce Super Bowl, Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. And there's like so much build up to it, so much prep. Most brands have been prepping for not just weeks, but months. And
Yeah.
depending on lead times, maybe back in the early summer, starting to
Yep.
plan out purchases. And so it's definitely an exciting weekend for the e-com world. But look, thanks for joining. This topic we're going to chat about today is honestly near and dear to my heart. I've kind of coined it realities and misconceptions and lessons learned of starting and scaling an e-com brand. Now, I will say the concepts we talk about today, there's going to be plenty that are more universal to just business in general, right? Starting and growing a business. But as we always do, we'll be chatting about specific examples and strategies around scaling an e-com brand. But the bottom line is, I'll just come out right at the beginning of the episode, letting everybody know what we're here to talk about is that at the end of the day, when you decide to start and scale a brand, it's all about loving the journey that you're on, honing the craft, not necessarily getting to an endpoint. And we have a lot of stuff to unpack around this subject today, and I'm excited for the conversation. So before we dive into chatting about that, though, Clay, walk us through your entrepreneurial journey. It's extensive, and walk me through it and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, I first kind of got my first bug, so to speak, when I was a sophomore in college. I went to the University of Tennessee back in 2001. I got it right here. I keep it right here on my desk. I published this book called A Vols Walk. It's a compilation of fans' stories about how they became a fan at the University of Tennessee, and that was back when Amazon was just a bookstore. I put yourself back into 2001. People still bought books at Borders Books and those types of brick and mortar stores. And then crowdsourcing wasn't a thing, wasn't even a term, but we went out to tailgates across campus and we crowdsourced stories from people. And we published those in the book and got the rights to put the Power T on it and got the color orange, which was patented, and sold them across the state and every Books a Million, Borders Books, Sam's Club, Walmart, Walgreens, all across the state. And um, had three business partners, still very dear friends with those guys today. And after selling an entire couple of football seasons worth of books, we looked at our bank account and there was no money there. There was no profit margin, and it was a tough lesson learned. When we sold the book for 20, it cost us about $9 to print it, but we sold it to distributors, the bookstores, for around 11. So gross profit was really around about a couple bucks, but by the time we paid gas and marketing expenses, we had enough for a couple burritos after that. But really fell in love with the idea of entrepreneurship and the idea of controlling my own destiny and not having a limit on my potential. Yeah, I carried different jobs. I worked, different economic development roles, recruiting companies to the state. But through that, I was always reading books or listening to podcasts about entrepreneurship, about raising venture capital, about scaling up brands, about building teams. And I'd started a handful of companies that never really got out of the gate. I started a mobile web development company that built mobile websites for BlackBerry phones. So if you can remember back when you had the QWERTY keyboard. We built websites or small microsites for Blackberries. We built. I did a tech transfer company out of the University of Memphis. Never got first dollar of revenue with that one. It took a handful of kind of getting up to the plate and striking out to kind of really understand what entrepreneurship was about. And then in 2014, I partnered with a guy and we invented and patented a home security product that could detect and prevent home break-ins. And this was a very complex product to make. It was metal stamping, powder coating, injection molding, firmware, software, electronics that communicated over to an app on Android and iOS. It communicated to Google and Alexa, and then ultimately we spun that product into a product that we sold into schools to prevent active shooters from getting into classrooms. And that one we raised at the time when I left the company about $7 million in capital from about 90 different investors. Had a team of about 13 people growing that business. So yeah, that's a
And
little bit
Shark
about
Tank.
my
Don't forget,
journey.
don't forget Shark Tank.
Shark Tank season 10. Yeah, go back. One of the most watched episodes. I think it in the most shared episode of all time. Well, we can
That's
get into
actually
that
how
if you
we
want
met.
to.
Well, the funny thing is that's actually how we met when I first started. So Clay has a very tight connection to the beginnings of Free to Grow CFO actually. When I first left Guardian Bikes, another Shark Tank company, and I served in addition to the CFO role, I served the business as the COO. And I was out just networking, calling on my network literally a few weeks into having started Free to Grow, and was talking to another fellow Christian who was like, hey, man, you've got to meet this other guy. He's out in Tennessee, and that was Derek,
Derek,
or
yeah.
depending on how you know him, Derek or William, I believe. And he lives, I believe, on Clay's Street. And I told him my story. I told Derek slash William my story, and he was like, and it included Shark Tank being a COO, and he's like, you have got to meet my friend Clay, who is a founder of a Shark Tank business, and he was the COO, and he's looking for his next thing. And so I met Clay just a couple weeks into having started Free to Grow. And so that's one of the reasons I'm so excited about this conversation, because we just hit it off immediately with just, I mean, effectively just sharing stories and ideas and thoughts about the right and the wrong way to think about scaling a brand, and even got to work on a project together, a brand called Curb Cover, that was really exciting and a lot of fun. But okay, there's a couple things that you mentioned in your background that I want to kind of like dive in on. One is this concept of like freedom and controlling your own destiny, right? I always say, talk about this a lot in my content, that like, why did you get into business in the first place, founder? Usually the word freedom or the idea of freedom is somewhere in there, right? That's like, that is the entrepreneurial ideal, is that I'm going to pave my own path and I'm going to be free to work on the things I want to work on, and hopefully become financially free through my business, right? And so we at Free to Grow, we work specifically with profit focused e-commerce brands. And there's this tight connection between being profitable and being able to control your own destiny, right? What are some of the things that come to mind when you start thinking about freedom, entrepreneurial freedom, and either where you see that go right or you see it go wrong?
Yeah, and I've taken 23 plus years to kind of really realize this, that I'm more passionate about the process of doing the work it takes to build something bigger than yourself. The result, while at first I started out thinking about the result, about the finish line of what that would look like when we exited or we IPO'd or whatever the dream was, I can tell you it's always going to be something different than what you expected. And I kind of just began enjoying the process it takes to get a brand to profitability, and then first revenue and then profitability. And the first one, it took a good 7 years for us to really hit a good stride in revenue. And then when I sold that company, the next one I started, a company called Glory Light, was much faster because the lessons that I had learned in the previous one were, there weren't as many headaches. There weren't as many, where to go. But most of the path was at least figured out for that business, and it got to profitability much faster. It got to scale much faster. Albeit it be a simpler product, but to me, I just love building something bigger than myself and enjoying the process. I'm a 5-time Ironman. I ran down the red carpet 5 times in different countries here in the U.S. And I wouldn't do that if I didn't like training every day, every week.
For sure. Well,
And
yeah,
I
it's
enjoy the
funny.
process of getting the finish line is what everybody sees. It's the stuff that
Totally.
people don't see that I enjoy.
Well, you know what though? If you study any like quote successful person, this could be an athlete, it can be, someone like Warren Buffett or Mark Cuban, presidents, like if you study someone who you admire in terms of their accomplishments, what's the common theme that you find behind all of them? They were all like super obsessed with the process, with the journey, right? And the outcomes of accomplishment and success that just ended up being the results of being obsessed with the journey, right? And I'm a musician. I'm a heavy metal musician, and like heavy metal guitar players are like the best guitar players in the world, in my opinion. And when I watch some of them play, I can get this feeling of like, man, where did they find, like, where did they learn these shortcuts from? And when I go and I watch YouTube videos or I read articles about these guys, you find out they practice 12 hours a day for years, right? And even to this day, they maybe don't have to practice 12 hours a day anymore, but they still have to maintain, right? They have to maintain and they have to always push themselves. And so if you are just living, in my experience, if you're living for the end, that's when you experience burnout, because what you do is you push yourself to these unsustainable limits, right? Going, this will pay off when I reach the end. And you realize you don't know if you will reach the end, when you'll reach the end, or what the end will even look like. And so if you want to be sustainable, you've got to just enjoy the process. Do you agree with that? And do you have anything else to add to that?
No, 1,000%. And when I first started Haven Lock back in 2014, my business partner and I kind of both agreed, like, hey, this is like a 10-year plan. And we were going to put everything we had into it for 10 years. But our vision was this big, elaborate, like IPO slash purchase buyout by another company where we would all go and we would rent out a big room, and all of our investors and friends and family would be there, and we would have a nice dinner, and that was kind of the dream, right? But when I sold my portion of that business, I sold it to a venture capital firm. When the money hit my bank account and I was done, and I'd signed off on all the papers and everything was, I was completely divested of that company. I looked at my wife on the couch. We had a glass of wine, and we're like, "It's done. Cheers!" Like it was not that big. That thing I'd built up in my mind was this big event, and ultimately it was still a successful event. But I got to share that with my wife. But it wasn't what I was planning, which that's okay, right? And now looking back, it was those. I was working 2 jobs. I was working for the state of Tennessee, recruiting companies. That was my full-time day job. So I was getting up at like 4 or 5 in the morning to work on this company, and then work until about 7 or 8 in the morning, then go to that job, and then come back and then work until sometimes midnight working on the company. And fortunately, I don't have to have that kind of cadence and rhythm now, but there's something to be said about what's done at dark is brought to the light, right? It's those things that you do when no one's looking, and the consistent reps that you have to put in. You mentioned like playing the guitar. You've got to learn those skills, and those skills never really go away, so that they just compound on each other. You get
Totally.
better, you get faster, you get better at making decisions, you get better at who you pick to work with. Like that's another
Totally.
big one for me, is like I can now decipher like character traits a little bit better than I could early on. So yeah, these all take reps and practice to learn those skills.
I'm actually not, I'm not exaggerating at all. I'm getting the goosebumps right now because I'm a lifetime entrepreneur just like you as well. And these lessons that we're talking about, this is the life of an entrepreneur. And like to me, this is what lights me up, right? Is like, hey, even though I haven't had that end all be all, whatever liquidity or monetization or exit like event yet, right? I'm growing as an entrepreneur and I'm becoming wiser, right? And the thing that's hard, here's the thing that's hard. I want everyone listening to this to just like for a moment like free themselves of the burden of like of the idea they have in their mind about what their life and their business is supposed to be like. Cuz the reality is, and this I'm speaking from a place of like pure vulnerability right now. We get down because we can't reconcile where we're at today with this lavish idea we have in our mind as entrepreneurs. And it's so hard because you go out there and you're like, I mean, you get on LinkedIn or you get on Twitter, you see the content, you read the books, and you're like, damn, all these guys got to figure it out. They're freaking crushing it. Like, look at Mark Cuban, look at freaking Warren Buffett, look at Kobe Bryant, like look,
Any of the middle micro influencers out there that
totally,
that are, it is so, it's a perceived thing that they got it overnight, and those people earned it, and
totally.
it took them a long time to get there, and
And
most
to
people
this
can't
day,
justify that.
but I'll even say, and I know I'm just gonna go out on a limb and just say I know you feel the same way. We still question ourselves every single day. Like every day, I'm like, man, I'm not good enough. Every day, I'm like, what's free to grow? And like in reality, we serve 31 brands. When I met Clay less than 3 years ago, I had one client.
Say there's
We
like
have a,
one or
we have a
two.
we have a team of 10 people that are all amazing, and the founders we work with are awesome. And like I bet you next year we'll be at 40 clients, maybe even more than that. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that like we are succeeding. And every day I wake up and I'm like,
Is it
man,
enough?
what is it enough? And like, where am I failing? Right. And so I'm saying this because I want, if you're listening to this episode, you're listening to this episode because you're looking for tools and tips and tricks to do a better job scaling your brand. And right now, I just want to free you and say, just keep going. Just stay in the game. Be willing to say, it's only a failure if you don't learn from it, right? And failure is an event. It's not a person. It's not you. It is an event. And here's the beautiful thing when you're ready to finally like um embrace failure is you can say, "Hey, that event failed. That thing failed, that decision failed, that product failed, that ad campaign failed, but I'm alive and I'm going to live a fight another day." And I can sit down and I can say, "Okay, what went right? What went wrong? And what am I going to change?" And if you do that, I've got on my screen here in my notes, Clay started 8 businesses, 6 failed. 6 out of 8 failed, right? 2 became $1 million plus brands. And the most recent one, Glory Light, which Clay basically just started, that one happened the most quickly, right? Like, like years and years into the game after failing, right? And so where I'm leading with this is like, Clay, let's talk about Glory Light, an ecom brand that reached 7 figures faster than any of your other businesses. Walk me through just the first things that come to mind, the learnings from your previous business failures that allowed you to start this business so much more wisely and achieve that scale and profitability so much more quickly.
So let's dive deep here. When I looked at Glory Light and the idea behind it, it's a first of all, it's a kids' night light that projects Bible verses onto the ceiling. Okay, and it's got this little tray that you put in these discs, and it shines a light through the film onto the ceiling, so it's in high definition. When I first got this idea from my business partner Matt, I looked and said, how fast can we get to an income producing product, right? And before, my whole entrepreneurial journey before, it was like, let's build a product that people would love, but we overcomplicated it. We made
Mm,
it too complicated, and it took forever to get to market. We had to have it connected to apps and all this other stuff, all this extra bells and whistles, that really the core value of it was preventing a home from being broken into. So my now learning is, how fast can I get something to market that adds value to someone without being too complicated. We could have made this way complicated. We could have tried to create an app that works with it. We could have tried to create a community of people sharing Bible verses and teaching their kids. We could have tried that, right? But no, let's just try to first get out the light as fast as possible to start, gauging the opportunity. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs have this big vision, and they try to have it all ready before they go to market. And you have to kind of really start with what you think is the magical power that you have in that product or that idea that really provides that desired outcome that you want people to have, and get to market much sooner. So with Glory Light, we were revenue positive within the first probably maybe 60 days, 58, 60 days. And the reason it took that long was because we had to order the product and have it manufactured and shipped here, right? I think we could have gotten it done sooner, uh, but the first one, it took me about 4.5 years. Right? It's a big difference. Yes, it's a different product, but now I'm looking at when I'm coaching other entrepreneurs, it's like, how do we strip out all the bells and whistles and focus on the one thing that just makes you unique? And let's start with that.
Really quick, I want to draw something out here, and then we'll keep going on the lessons that you learned that help you to get Glory Light started and scaled a lot faster. There's a financial concept here that you're drawing out, or that you're dancing around, that I want to just explicitly say, because I see it a lot with the dozens of brands that we work with and the other dozens of brands that I talk to and we don't end up working with, which is that when you're sitting down and you're designing a product, right? One, it has to truly start with meeting a need, right? And you're talking about like that one thing that like drives value to the consumer so that they'll even want to vote yes for that product with their dollars, right? But then there's a second thing that I think it's more intuitive for founders to go like, "Oh, I get that. Like, let's get some revenue traction, right?" But the second thing is, and this ties back to the simplicity piece of what you're walking through here, is like, is there enough margin in this product for it to even make sense to scale it, right? Like, you may get revenue traction, and at the price point and you're looking at your variable costs, there's just like no money to cover marketing, right? And even if there's knowing what your CAC, like the range that your CAC is going to probably sit in, because like you can't really affect that too much. There are just CAC bands at certain spend levels, right? For the most part, can those even be covered by the unit economics of your product? And as you get more and more complicated, right, there's more and more risk that's going to drive more and more variable cost, which is going to leave you less and less on a unit economic basis for dollars to cover marketing, and then hopefully cover more than marketing, cover overhead, and drop profitability to the bottom line. Like, what have you seen, using Glory Light as an example, like being more simple? What has that done for your cost and your margin structure for the product?
For first and foremost, it allowed us to bring on affiliates or content creators to tell our story. When
Mm.
we were starting this brand, we sell to moms and grandmoms. Okay, that is our core demographic. 100% moms and grandmoms. Guess what? I am not. I am not a mom or a grandmom, and neither is my business partner Matt or my business partner Brett in this company. So we had to say, okay, who's going to be the face of the brand, the marketing, the outward position of the brand, right? So we had to make it so simple that any mom or grandmom could get the light and understand what it does, and so that
Hmm.
they could talk about it. We have over almost 400 affiliates now that are creating content on our behalf and sharing it on their social media accounts. So that is reducing our customer acquisition costs and our marketing spend, but we do supplement that. But um, if we were to try to create all of that on our own,
Hmm.
that message wouldn't be as simple to come across. So if
Sure.
we like with going back to the Haven Lock days, we thought it was important for us to be a tech focused product, meaning it integrated with Alexa, it integrated with Google, it integrated with Android and iOS. It had digital keys, and you could share encrypted keys and get a schedule when someone comes and goes, right? And all of our branding and all of our marketing was around the tech features, and it was falling flat. Well, guess what? People didn't care about that. People wanted to sleep safe at night, especially women whose husbands traveled, right? And they were gone, and the women wanted to be safe at home with their kids. So we repositioned the brand about being safe, about protecting your kids, about sleep, having peace of mind and safety. And that's where our marketing took off. When I say go to that one thing that has the value, find that one thing, right? And for Haven, it took us a long time to find that. And once we did, that's where it unlocked. But if we would have started there, we would have
Mm.
gotten to profitability. We would have gotten to better marketing earlier on than we did. And sometimes entrepreneurs, especially first or second time entrepreneurs, they want to build this big grand vision that's too complicated for people to understand right now. They can't really see it because they don't know that one thing that it's about or the value that it brings. So we try
Yeah.
to now coach brands to like identifying what is that magical power that that separates you from the others, right?
Well, and another thing too, excuse me, is that the more complicated it is, even if you can get the consumer to understand it, the more complicated it is to manage operationally. And the more complicated it is to manage operationally, oftentimes you see that affects profitability negatively, right? Because it's so complicated. You have manufacturing challenges and issues. There's probably just higher cost overall in your bill of materials. And so I think what Clay is getting at here is like if you're trying to launch a brand or even just launch a new product, right, within your existing brand, figure out how to get something simple that really tests your assumption around what is that one thing. Get it to market as quickly as you can, because the only way to really validate it is to get actual consumer feedback. And the best way to do it is to try to sell it. But I see a lot of brands make big mistakes where they'll launch a big product, they'll do a big product launch, and they're excited about the product. They're personally excited about the product, but they haven't validated what kind of traction it's going to get. And they order this big lot of it, right? It arrives, they do this launch campaign, and if it flops, they're stuck with all this inventory and all this cash tied up in inventory. And now all of a sudden they're slashing prices, right? And so like they're completely diminishing the value of the product. And so, just what Clay is talking about here is very practical advice for how to think about like validating what really moves the needle with consumers. What I want to ask you another question here, Clay, about Glory Light and like, drawing from those learnings of your 6 failed businesses and your previous brand that did have a heavy e-com presence at Haven Lock. When it comes to the advertising and the marketing for Glory Light, in addition to the affiliate strategy, what else have you guys done that's been successful, but that came from your wisdom of like previous failures and lessons learned?
Keep in mind, I've been involved in buying Meta ads, Google ads for probably at least 8 years, going on 8 to 9 years. Went through the iOS 14 changes, and where we used to create nicer, more polished, more produced content.
Mm-hmm.
A big lesson learned in today's world. We're in November of 24. This might change next year, but polished, produced content doesn't work as well as it used to. So now we have to get into a rhythm or a cadence of creating more real, authentic, less polished, less produced content, and being able to, as the owner of the brand, being able to let go of that. Because I see this a lot of times with businesses that I coach or work with is we'll go get a handful of affiliates to create some content for them. And they'll go, well, the way they plated this, or the way they set this up, or the way they presented it, the lighting didn't look good, or the audio wasn't good, or it didn't show this best feature of this product, or it didn't show this best benefit of this product. You got to kind of let go. And your brand is what people say about you. It's not about what you say your brand is.
Sure.
And most of the time, founders want to control that brand message. You have to, in today's world, you have to completely let your audience control that brand message. And with Glory Light, we have completely let go of what's been said and what we require from our affiliates, and made it super simple. All they have to do is basically say, yes, I want to create a video, and we send them a light, and then they post a video about it. We don't monitor if they posted. We don't monitor what they said. We don't it's basically, we're letting you get the value and you transcribe that to your audience, right? But we've made it simple for them.
We'll say, in my mind, what you're talking about here actually is very much related to the concept of simplicity and getting a product to market to test that one thing with consumers ASAP. When you're talking about creating content or creative, right, to use for advertising, how do you test it? You get it out the door and you test it, right? And so if you sit there and pour over perfection, what are you doing? You're just waiting longer to get it out in the marketplace and test it, right? I mean, like even when we started this podcast, I sat down with my EA, Shara Lee, who who does our marketing. And I said, Shara Lee, I want to launch this podcast next week, and I don't care how perfect it is. Like we're going to launch it, and we're going to just start, and we're going to learn along the way. And funny enough, like this mic that I'm using right now, it just came last night. I bought it on a Black Friday sale. I've had this crappy little $19 mic that I've used for the last 10 months running this podcast. It was good enough to just get started. And I actually have 2 new fancy lights that I bought on Black Friday sale as well, that are sitting here that weren't here before. And like,
But how many podcasts have you done between now?
yeah, we've done like 20 something, and I've had clients and prospects reach out to me way more than I thought, and say, "Hey man, I've been listening to the podcast. It's been helpful, and the content is real deal. Like it's really actually helpful." And like, we're getting better at producing podcasts now, right? But we just started, and we, you know what I mean? So go
Let's
ahead.
go back to this. We talked about putting in the reps earlier on.
Yeah.
All right. An entrepreneur, especially first-time entrepreneurs, this will drive this home. To be in the top 60% of all podcasts on the internet, you have to produce 2 episodes. Most people only do 1, and it doesn't go the way they think. They overthink it. They don't do the reps. They don't go on and book the next show, and they fail. So if you want to be in the top 60%, 2 episodes. This goes if you're trying to raise capital, right? If you're trying to raise venture capital or raise capital, you can't just send out your deck to one investor
and get a no, and it's over.
Right? And it's over, right? And people say, "Well, I tried that, it didn't work." That's a good example. To be in the top 90% of all podcasts, you have to produce 20 episodes.
Woo! There we go, baby. We passed 20.
All right.
You want to know something funny? I think what we're just talking about here is a universal truth, right? By the way, which is why we both have so many examples. I've been really into reading sales books recently. And do you know how many times you have to ask for the order on average to get the sale? 9.
9.
And do you know what the average is of what most salespeople ask? It's 1. It's 1 time.
I was going to say most people fail to ask at all.
Most salespeople ask 1 time.
1 time.
And it takes 9 times. And there's this book I read by a guy named Daniel Priestley. I highly recommend anyone listening to this pick this book up. It's a short read, and every page is helpful. And he talks about 7 foring people. And what does that mean? It's that you need to have 7 quality touches, right? That's the 7, and then 4 is in 4 different locations, so 4 different channels, right? And the 11 is I can't remember what the 11 is, but what it has to do with is just that you need to be what his words are: don't be perfect, be prolific. And what does being prolific mean? Get started, crank out the content, start writing a newsletter, start writing on LinkedIn. Like for us, we started on LinkedIn 2 years ago, and you know what we did? I sat down with Shirley and I said, "Hey Shirley, I want to post once a week." And as soon as that got easy, I said, "I want to post twice a week." And as soon as that got easy, I said, "I want to post 3 times a week." Today, 2 years later, we have like quadrupled our following. We get leads from LinkedIn all the time, and we post 12 times a week. And it seems completely easy now, right? But like we just got started, and I've posted so many things that just like no one replied to, like no one commented on, no one liked. The impressions looked really crappy. But and still today, I'll be on a streak that I'm just like, man, I'm crushing it. Like engagements are killing it, impressions are killing it. And then I'll write something that I think is going to be amazing, and it just flops. And you know what? You just keep going. Here's going back to the point of all of the stuff we've been talking about. You know why I do it? Because I love the journey of creating content, because I want to be helpful. Because when I was on the founding team of Guardian Bikes and I was learning how to scale a business for the first time, I had this insatiable desire to read books and listen to podcasts, because I didn't know anything about scaling a business, building a team, running an e-commerce brand, managing inventory, managing a supply chain, running financial models. I didn't know the last thing about any of that stuff in real life. And you know what got me through it was like having the right people around me and consuming content. And so I want Free to Grow to produce content because I want to be helpful. You know why? Because scaling an e-com brand is hard, and it's lonely, and it's challenging, and you wake up every day second guessing yourself as a founder. And I want to remind people that there are great resources out there that can help, and we just want to be one of those resources. And so like I create content because I love the journey. I check the metrics because I want to see what does well and what doesn't do well, and I want to learn from that. But I don't do it for the metrics.
And
I do it to be helpful.
I found giving every time is more rewarding than the metrics, right?
Totally.
Just the process of me thinking through some content that I want to give someone, whether it lands or it doesn't, right? I felt rewarded by giving that away. I didn't
Totally.
hold it in, and maybe one day it might hit the right person and they'll learn from it. And that to me kind of makes it all worthwhile. When you're not seeing the metrics, you're not seeing the engagement. It's like, well, that's okay. Somebody will get it one day and it'll hit home. But yeah, it doesn't all have to be perfect.
So I want to ask you, you have a lot of experience with raising capital, both for your businesses and advising with some of the people that you coach on raising capital. Walk me through just the first things that come to mind about best practices, some of which may be surprising to founders or misconceptions, right, by founders. What are some of the do's and don'ts for raising capital that you've learned over your years of like doing it well and also failing?
First and foremost, you got to understand rep count is important. You to get good at raising capital, you've got to pitch a lot of times. A lot of people that I coach, they want to perfect their deck. That's the pitch deck is usually 9 times out of 10, if not 99% of the time, the entry point, and it's the linchpin needed to get you a meeting or get you a pitch. Okay, it's typically the first thing that investors are going to want to see before they even consider taking a meeting with you, right? Um, a lot of times, entrepreneurs raising capital think they have a good deck and they send it out and they're not getting any even the opportunity to pitch.
Mm-hmm.
So having a really good deck that's streamlined into the problem, the value prop, in the market opportunity, right? It's having that expectation that if I send this out to 10 people, they think they're going to get 10 meetings, right? And actually, they'll probably get one or maybe zero, right? So you've got to get into the reps of creating places for you to pitch. So what we did is we had this deck and it was always evolving. It was always this document that was continuing to evolve. But we didn't wait around for people to say yes to our pitches. We started renting rooms, and I would go find other entrepreneurs who were raising capital and say, hey, you invite your network of investors, I'll invite my network of investors, and we'll have like a mini Shark Tank pitch. We'll rent out a room, we'll have some beer and wine, and we'll invite as many people as we can. So that got me the practice or the rehearsal it needed to be able to pitch. And sometimes nobody would show up other than the other two companies, right? Let's put it this way, very few investors would show up, right? So we would have a couple other entrepreneurs and we would just critique each other and pitch and help each other, like just having those reps. And you could see other people pitch their business and you start to learn from them, right? And that's one thing that I think is a misconception that founders think is like, oh, I'm just going to create this deck and I'm going to send it out and I'm going to get the meeting and I'm going to get the investment. And it doesn't work that way. You've
For
got to go
sure.
out there and practice and rehearse it. And there were times where we were pitching a good 40 to 50 pitches a week, if not more. And some of those were groups of angels or syndicates where there might be 10 or so people on a call or in a meeting. But we were getting in the reps. And over time, you start to go back to yourself and go, I wish I would have said that differently. I wish I would have shown this instead of that. Another thing is people get too comfortable pitching off of their deck. The deck is used to get the meeting, but it's more important that you build your own deck so you tell yourself the narrative of what you're going to say while you're building it. You're
Yeah,
mentally building your pitch deck, usually 10 to 12 slides. You're mentally rehearsing over and over and over while you build your deck. And that is how you ultimately tell your pitch, but you don't use the deck to tell it. It's
for
more of a
sure.
natural conversation that you have with an investor, where you're actually taking product and you're showing them, right? You're putting it in their hand so they can touch it and feel it. It's a natural conversation instead of, hey, look at my pitch deck and pitching slide by slide by slide. That's not authentic conversation, right?
For sure.
I think those are big misconceptions that founders have. Very rarely would we use a deck to pitch when we were raising capital, unless we were on stage and pitching to an audience, or we were in like an angel syndicate where we were pitching a bunch of investors at one time, taking them through like a visual where we were remote, like we were raising money during COVID. So, that was used to pitch the deck. But now if you're going to meet in person or a one-on-one call, it's more conversational
For
and you've
sure.
got to be able to to tell the right things to get that investor of like, why should I join in you in solving this problem? Or why should I join in you to go on this crusade together to this promised land that you're forecasting here?
So what this all makes me think of is I'm seeing this pattern. Again, Free to Grow works with 30 plus profit focused and growing e-commerce brands. And I talk to dozens every month as I am going through our sales funnel because I manage all of our sales. And I'm noticing this connection between what we're talking about here and brands that withstand the test of time and ultimately achieve success. And it's that the brand is built around a really true mission driven purpose that the founder and usually the leadership team are just, they're truly bought into. They're not fake bought into it. They are bought into it, right? The most impressive growth and profitability rates that we see within the brands that we work with, there is this almost cult-like following inside the business that like this product is making the world a better place, right? And in fact, that is the primary reason why I started Free to Grow in the first place, because I believe that scaling an e-commerce brand is just about one of the hardest things you could choose to do in the business world. And it's lonely and it's challenging, and you get into this, you start this business for, you get this allure of freedom and controlling your own destiny, which you mentioned when we first started the episode. And then you almost get trapped by how complicated it is to scale it and turn a profit and manage the finances and also manage marketing and manage operations and customer experience and all of this stuff, right? And I just seen in my, years of being in the e-commerce world, I've seen just this overwhelm and this stress and this oppression of this thing that was supposed to create freedom now becoming oppressive, right? And the one way that I know how to come alongside and help those founders is to give them the financial intelligence that they need to make decisions with confidence. As you grow, you have more and more people asking you for more and more money. Your ad agency wants more ad dollars. Your supply chain person wants more inventory. Your COO wants to hire more people. And guess what? As you grow, all of those decisions cost more and more money, more and more zeros at the end. And if you don't have a CFO who can build out a budget and a forecast and a financial model and understands scaling an e-com brand from both a financial model perspective and a strategy perspective, if you don't have that, you're just going, yes or no, we can or can't do that. And it's really a guess. And when you say yes, it's like, man, are we going to run out of money? And if you say no, it's like, man, are we going to stop growing because I just said no to that? And so the point I'm making is, scaling Free to Grow as a firm is actually really hard. I have plenty of days where I second guess myself, but then I get the comments and the feedback from our clients about life before Free to Grow and life after, and how much more confident they are and how they can sleep easy at night and how we've helped them through really challenging situations that they couldn't have made it through on their own. And that mission that we're on, that's what keeps us going. And I think it's no different for an e-com brand. I look at Glory Light or even look at Haven Lock. I know for a fact you guys were like, we have to solve this problem, right? We're not going to give up. We have to solve this problem. Guardian Bikes, making safer kids bikes. It was like, we have to get these to market. We cannot let our competition beat us. We need to make the world a better place. That is what your why, that's one of the ways that you find the energy to stay on the journey,
And that
right?
why, when you go back to like what are some misconceptions or pitfalls that founders make when trying to raise capital, is they can't quantify that why. We call it the North Star metric, right? What is the North Star your business is going after, and how are you measuring and tracking it? And it comes down to that why, right? It's the number of children we serve, right? The number of children that have a glory light in their home. That is our North Star. For other companies, it's something different, but being able to articulate that to an investor, and how you're getting traction against that North Star, and how you're on your path to that North Star, that's what's building investor confidence, right? And that's the why behind what you're doing. And if you cannot articulate that, then the investor can't see the vision.
Totally.
So that's a big point that I think a lot of startup people that are raising capital make. Also, another one is they're not really an investable type of company. Their growth isn't an outsized return big enough to get the return on capital. They're not playing in a big enough market, or the potential for the exit isn't big enough
That's a
to
big one.
take that risk. And a lot of times people go, I just want to raise capital to grow my business. And also, well, what makes you think money is going to help you scale this? And if they can't answer that question, then they're not an investable company, right? They
Totally.
usually say, I want to invest in marketing, or I want to invest in inventory, right? No, you need to invest in creativity. Creativity will get you everything that you want. It'll bring in the capital, it'll bring in the customers, it'll bring in more sales, whatever you're looking for. You've got to invest in creativity. And when you're not creating, investors can't get behind that, right? If you're just
Yeah,
asking for inventory money, or you're asking for marketing money, that is hard to scale profitably, right? And
totally.
it's a tough cost of capital too.
Well, it's funny because I actually see the same dilemma that you're talking about. Like the economics, the game isn't big enough for that. 3 to 5. It depends on who you're investing, who's investing, right? Call it 3 to 10x return that you need, depending on what stage you're in and what kind of investors you're raising from. If that opportunity is not there, then the investors aren't going to invest. I see the same thing with unit economics and investing in scaling advertising. Is that like you can't bring a product to market and then figure out the unit economics later that allow you to be able to afford a CAC that scales on digital ad channels. You have to engineer the unit economics from day one to be able to afford the CAC to scale in whatever sales channels you're trying to scale in. It doesn't happen by accident. It has to happen intentionally. And it's the same way. Okay. Unfortunately, I got to land the plane here. I actually think we're going to probably have to have you back because we got through like half the agenda that we were going to talk about, but it's because there's so many things that we could chat about between your experience, the wisdom that you have gleaned over the years, and just kind of the overlap that you and I have on how we see the business world. So, but before we land the plane, I always like to ask a personal question to everybody who comes on the show. And, as I mentioned, I believe I mentioned earlier, Clay is a fellow Christian as well as myself. And I think it's really important to highlight that like faith shapes our journey and our mission as entrepreneurs and as business leaders. And so how does your faith shape your entrepreneurial perspective and your life as a business leader?
I used to think everything was in my control. And with successes or failures, I didn't go to God in every circumstance or every partnership or every, and I just said, I can control this, right? I can figure it out if it goes bad. And now it's more like, hey, God's in control and I'm just a steward. And like, to me, it's a lot more comforting knowing that I'm not in control. He's going to put the right people in front of me, and he's given me the skill sets and the experiences to know and decipher who the right and wrong people are that I need to be working with. Over time, it's just taken time for me to comprehend and learn that, and now go. There's some freedom in knowing that I don't have to make every decision. I don't have to. I can just lean on him, and he'll guide me in the way that where he wants to take this company. It was specifically with Glory Light being a kid's nightlight that projects Bible verses and the Word of God. Very on the two guys that I'm in partnership with on this, we were like, this is his company, and we're just using our skill sets that he's given us to take it to wherever he wants us to take it. So there's no pressure, right? We don't have that pressure of getting some sort of outsized return, and we don't have investors, so we're not having to get, and that there's some freedom in that, right? There's
Absolutely.
not as much pressure. And I know not every business can be like that, but the more you think, hey man, I'm just gonna like turn this over to God and let him, direct me. Like I got into iron. I'll quickly. I know you want to end this here, but when I was selling Haven Lock, it got to be a very stressful situation. We had a board of directors, we had 90 plus investors, a lot to divide up, right? It got very stressful. So I went to the sport of Ironman to have that time with God. And the longer I spent with God on a bike or on a run or on a swim or whatever I was training for, the clearer my mind got about how to respond or how to react or how to position or how to strategize the close of this sale of this company. And before, I did not allow God in that that amount of time. I was just making decisions on my own. So I definitely allow God to do His work and give Him the time He needs, and it'll turn out.
Man, I'm getting goosebumps again because I was praying about this exact thing this morning in my morning quiet time. That I feel this sense that my wife and I, with our three little kids and the couple of businesses that we run, we have been just moving too fast. And it's been so, we've just been trying to control, keep everything in order, right? Keep everything under control. We've been trying to control everything as we all do, right? And it's been overbearing, completely overbearing. And I've been getting this sense of like feeling like I'm burning out. And luckily, God has taught me that feeling burned out doesn't mean I need to give up. It doesn't mean I need to give up the efforts, right? Or the what I'm trying to do, but it does mean that I need to give up control and let it happen in his way and at his pace, right? And so there's a book on my bookshelf called At God's Pace. And I was this morning feeling like I needed to pick it up and reread it. And I think I just got the confirmation right now that I need to reread it. I was praying about it this morning just a few hours ago. So, Clay, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show. This is kind of a full circle thing for me, coming from like the first couple weeks of starting Free to Grow to having you on the show to talk about all these awesome things. Look, as a reminder for everyone, release yourself of the burden of trying to live up to this lavish vision you have in your head. Don't give up the visions that you have, but realize it's a journey. It's not an end, right? Work hard at loving the journey, work hard at making an impact, work hard at honing the craft, but give yourself a bit of a break, you know? And if you are a person of faith, maybe trust God a little bit, right? To take some of the burden off of your plate. So this is an awesome conversation. I know that everyone's going to find it super valuable. Just as a reminder before we land the plane here, if you want any helpful tips on scaling a profit-focused D2C brand, consider following me, Jon Blair, on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in learning more about how Free to Grow's D2C accountants and CFOs can help your brand increase profit and cash flow as you scale, check us out at freetogrowcfo.com. And until next time, scale on. Thanks, Clay.